Hey, everybody, I'm Dave Hartman, and this is the Three Gun Show, the world's largest three gun podcast. And we got a special treat for you here tonight. I got my buddy George Dorbert on the podcast, and we're going to be talking about some range medical advice situations. We're going to tell some stories of some stuff that we saw. George is going to tell us how to deal with those situations, and we're going to have a good time. So, first, George, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, man. I'm really excited for this topic. I'm glad you brought it up because so for me, a little bit of background on me, George, just so you know, like I've done like an AED course, a CPR course when I
Right.
was working at Lockheed. I've taken a couple TC3 classes, but
Yep.
I'm probably not the guy that you want. Like if there's no one else, I'll jump in, right? But I'm probably not the first person that you'd want to do this. So George, let's start with your background because I know that you actually have a little bit more authority in this area than I do.
Yeah, I work for the fire department. I've been a firefighter EMT now for a little over 26 years in the volunteer setting. Also on the career side, I've got almost 22 years in there. I'm looking forward to retirement coming up here soon. I'm counting down the years. Of course, my wife says that I got to find another job as soon as I retire, but we'll see.
She doesn't want you around or what?
Well, I think it's a little bit of that because she always says, "Hey, when are you going to shoot again?" I think she gets tired of me being home so much, but I told her that that's fine. I don't mind working again as long as like Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday only. That way, I can travel to matches on
Yeah,
Friday
that's
and shoot
nice.
weekend matches, and then fly home on Monday or whatever, or drive home. But yeah, started out as a volunteer when I was young. I actually um, what really kind of got me into this was 17 years old, sitting on the couch with my dad. We're watching a movie. I was waiting to go out with my buddies. It was kind of early and they weren't ready to go hang out. So I'm sitting there on the couch with my dad. We're watching a movie. And all of a sudden, this guy starts knocking on his door, his front door. I mean, he is just pounding on the front door. And we both jump up and like, what the hell is going on here? So the guy is dressed like in a business suit. He's wearing like a long winter trench coat. It was cold out, and he starts yelling about an accident. He's like pointing across the street, right across the street from my dad. So we look out and we're like, "What the heck is going on?" And we see this car overturned, and we see two guys standing there, basically like holding the roof of this car to keep it from crushing this woman because she's partially ejected out of the car.
Oh wow.
Um, and of course, my dad and I run over there, and he had been a volunteer for a couple of years, and right away he grabs this lady, and she's like, just I could tell that she's dead. She's purple, and I'm looking at her like, holy shit, this lady's dead. So he grabs her and he pulls her out of the window, and he looks at me, and must see the shock on my face, and he yells at me. He said, "Get down here and start doing CPR." And it kind of snapped me back into reality, and just the relieving that pressure of the car being on her. She went from like purple to just a ghostly white. And the whole time I'm like pushing on this lady's chest. I'm thinking, this lady's dead. After about 4 minutes of continuous CPR, she had regained the pulse. She didn't fully regain consciousness yet, but she had regained the pulse, and she was breathing on her own. Fire department had arrived, and for me, it was kind of like that moment where I said to myself, you know what, you really don't have a direction in life that you want to go, but this is pretty cool. It was the second time I had done CPR and the first actual save. And that young lady, she spent like 21 days in a trauma center before she was released. So she had a lot of extensive injuries that they worked on for quite some time before she was released in the hospital. So
Wow. That-
yeah, and I think the coolest thing was, of course, my dad and I were walking back across the front yard like all nonchalant. And I look at him and he looks at me, and I just stick my hand out and he kind of slaps a high five with me, and we just go back into the house, wash our hands and finish watching the movie. But for him, it was like no big deal because he had done it quite a bit, and for me, it was
mhm.
kind of like my first real taste. And I said, "Man, that's pretty cool." So I kind of really got involved with the fire department and the volunteer side of it. I had an opportunity to long story short, it was my freshman year of college. My dad fell off a ladder and broke his back 2 places, crushed 2 vertebrae in the spine. So I had to basically shuffle my classes to night classes. I was already working part time at night, and then I started like running his business during the day. So, 4 years of that while still trying to go to school and basically running myself ragged for 20 hours a day. I said, man, I don't want any parts of this. So I had an opportunity to take a job at the fire department, and I said, I'm gonna jump all over that.
That's
So
incredible, man. Like, there's not a lot of people that have like a specific moment they can point back to and say like was that was like a turning point in my life. That specific instant was a turning point in my life that like guided me to where I am right now, and
y-
like
y-
gave you like a whole career and purpose
yeah,
and everything. That's
I tell
amazing.
you what, it basically made me grow up overnight. He was lucky that when he fell off the ladder, the Baltimore City Fire Department was, they had a station right around the corner. They transported him to Sinai Hospital, and the gentleman who did his spine surgery actually was doing brain surgery the day he was brought into the hospital. He had to wait 3 days before they could do the spinal surgery on him because of the swelling. So, those 3 days there was a lot of reflection on my part on, all right, what the heck do I got to do now? And it was basically take care of my mom, my sister, and my dad. So I had to, shuffle everything around, shuffle my life around, and run his business during the day, go to school at night when I could, and just pay the bills. So it was for me,
Yeah.
it was like I basically grew up overnight, matured overnight, and said, all right, you got to do what you got to do.
Right on. So what is your like technical title? Like if someone asks what do you firefighter EMT,
Okay,
firefighter
so
EMT?
yeah, I started out, at the bottom like everybody else. As a
Mhm.
firefighter, progressed to driver operator. As a driver for almost 10 years. I then promoted to lieutenant captain. Spent 9 years as an officer. And last January, I said, you know what, I need to take it easy on myself. I had fallen off of a ladder. I had shoulder surgery from an injury at work, and then I had fallen off of a ladder about 13 feet that pretty good hurting on me. And I said, you know what, I need to start taking it easier on myself. So I moved over to the prevention and inspection division. Now I work as a fire inspector. I go around basically doing code enforcement for buildings, like fire inspection, code enforcement, and things like that. So basically, fire marshal duties, if the best way to equate it, if people have an idea what that is.
I gotcha. I
Yeah.
gotcha. So when did like competitive shooting come into play for you?
Um, it's I had always shot guns. When I was 5, I got a Red Ryder. We started out with that, progressed to like a 22 rifle, 22 handgun. Would shoot bottles and cans in the backyard where we lived all the time. And then I moved into an area where there was a shooting range about less than 10 miles from the house. So they were having like steel challenge matches there. So I thought I'm gonna go check this out. I thought I was a pretty good shot, and shooting punching holes in paper, it's pretty easy to do. So of course, your ego is pretty big because you think you can shoot the X ring all the time. And I went to the steel challenge thing, and I had a blast. It was great. It was better than shooting paper. So I thought, well, this is pretty cool, but there's got to be something else. There's got to be something better than that. So I got looking around on the internet, and I said, well, hey, there's this thing called USPSA. So there was a club about 30 miles from my house. So I went up there and I watched them shoot a USPSA match, and I thought, man, that was pretty cool. So I joined USPSA and I started to go to that club, and I shot 2 matches there. And um, this is the York Isaac Walton League. So
Oh, okay.
there's I know Dean DeTurk's been on before with you, and he's talked about shooting at York, and that's kind of where the 3-man 3 gun started with Howard Thompson. And there's a lot of guys, a lot of awesome shooters that shoot at that club. So you go to this local club match, and I get invited to go shoot my first PSA match there, and I'm shooting with Howard Thompson and Greg Jordan. And I know Greg, he's been on here.
Yeah.
So, of course, a new guy had never shot it before, and I'm watching these guys, and I'm thinking, all right, I can run at that pace. And of course, Greg gets up there and he lays down this blistering run, and I get up there and I'm shooting M&P, and my M&P sounds like it's a Glock 18 because I thought Greg shot it that fast, I got to shoot it that fast, right? So,
Classic.
I just smoked through this mag on all these targets, right? And I start hearing Charlie Mike, Delta Mike, Mike Mike, Charlie Mike, and I'm like, "Huh, maybe that wasn't so good." So I thought,
Who's
well, maybe I
Mike?
better yeah, I thought maybe I better slow down a little bit because I certainly can't shoot at the same pace that he did. Um, And of course, that's like the first USPSA match you go to, and then the second one, and then they said, "Hey, we're going to start doing this 3-gun stuff." I was like, "Heck yeah, whatever that is, let's try it out." And those guys were dabbling in it then. They were getting away from USPSA and they were doing 3-gun. And this was like early. This was like 2012. So I went and watched one of those, and I was like, "Holy crap, that's way better than Steel Challenge, way better than USPSA. I want to do this."
Mm-hmm.
So they had a 3-man 3-gun match coming up, and those matches are kind of like bragging rights. There's no prize table or anything. So I got 2 guys from work, and we always go to the range and goof off on our days off. And I got 2 guys from work. I said, "Let's go shoot this 3-gun match." So we shot it, and I mean, we were like almost dead last, but we had a blast, and it was awesome. So I said, "You know what? I want to keep doing this." And of course, I couldn't talk them into it. So I stuck around and started shooting up there all the time. And when you shoot at York, there's so many great shooters. Of course, Greg shoots the Mid Atlantic multi gun match there. You got Rick Torres, Blaze Romano, Buddy Knight. Those guys all shot on the 3-Gun Nation Pro Series. You got Dean DeTurk who shoots there. Mike Stevens, Garrett Booth, Kevin Downing. These guys are awesome shooters that could be at that pro level, but they're not traveling to as many major matches, outside of the local scene as much. But the talent pool there is just phenomenal. I mean, when you go to shoot there, I mean, you got to have your A game, or you're going to be middle to bottom third of the pack.
Right.
And then we're centrally located, so you're getting shooters from New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia. We've even had guys like Matt Kupica and Nick Molina and Josh Tarrant come down for the Mid Atlantic multi-gun match there. I know you did a match recon on that with Josh. So
Yeah.
yep, that was I think he got DQ'd that match, and then he was playing with a snake or something there. So that black snake is huge. That thing was like 5 or 6 feet long, and and everybody always exaggerates the length of the snake they see, but I'm telling you, this thing is a minimum 5 or 6 feet long. And it hangs out in the one little shed where they keep like a lot of target stands and stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and Josh just run around playing with it like a
yeah,
crazy person.
yeah.
All right. Well, so we got a little background on you. We know your expertise in the topic that we're about to talk about. And we
Yep.
know about shooting. Oh, I'd like to step back just real quick and
Okay.
want to answer a listener question. So I got an
All right.
email the other day, George,
Okay.
and this is from a guy who said he's new to 3-gun and he's been shooting silhouette for a long time, long range silhouette. And he's like, I'm trying to listen to your show, and I'm doing like two or three a day, and I'm gonna be caught up. But
Right.
where should I start at first? And like, first of all, the fact that someone would go back and listen to like all 230 episodes right now, like that's a lot of listening. That's a big commitment.
I've been trying to work on that myself. So I understand how he feels, because no matter what podcast you listen to, you pick up things and you learn things from it.
Oh yeah.
I don't care if you think you know everything. There's always something to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I've listened to all of the 2017 podcasts. I listened to everything in 2018 and 19, and I'm going back. Matter of fact, I was at the gym yesterday and I was listening to the one you did with an early podcast with um oh shoot, now I'm drawing a blank on his name. The guy who wears the crazy pants all the time.
John McClane.
Yeah, John McClane. And I was listening to the one, and it was talking about like I guess training and preparing for matches. So I was listening to those at the gym. So I'm going back and I'm listening to early podcasts. Like I listened to the very first one you did with Greg, and I've listened to almost all of them so far. I'd love to do it when I'm cutting my grass, because I got quite a few acres of grass. So when I'm cutting grass, I listen to a podcast. When I'm splitting firewood, I listen to them. When I'm at the gym, I listen to them. I'm listening all the time. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. Well, so there's actually a John McClane episode that I recommended this guy listen to. So this gentleman's name is Brian, and so what I told him was I gave him 5 good podcasts that I really like, and then 1 match recon that I thought he could get some value out of, that would have a little bit of information on like how matches run and things like that.
Right.
And so I'll start there. That was the Fort Benning match recon. That was if you're following along at home, that's episode 221. With Jake Latola. And the reason I included that one is there's a lot of good information on prepping for a match in there. And then Jake like really brought it with some super technical knowledge in there.
Right.
So that's one of the really good ones. And then I'll just run through the other ones I recommended for them. So obviously, Intro to Three Gun, which is
Yep.
number 172 with Matt Kupica. It's a good one.
Yep. That's a great podcast.
Shooter Etiquette with Dylan Easley and Corinne Mosier, which is episode 147. Because I think
That's
shooter
that's
etiquette's like something everybody can brush up on.
Absolutely. I have not had a chance. I heard you mention that in a recent podcast. I have not had a chance to listen to that one. I actually started like once I burned through everything recent, I went back to the beginning, and I've been starting at the beginning and
Oh,
working my
nice.
way up. So I haven't made it to that podcast, but I do want to catch that one with Dylan. I love talking to Dylan every time I see him on the range, and so I know that's going to be a good podcast.
Yeah, it's I thought it was awesome. Not just because I was part of it, but yeah, I really like that one. Um, then long range preparation with Ruben Alexson, which was episode 182,
Yes.
and that I thought was really amazing because there was a lot of people that were telling me like I've listened to that 2 and 3 times. To
Yes.
guys were telling me they completely ripped their scopes off and put them back together because they had set it up all wrong. Which so that I thought was really valuable. The importance of vision in shooting with Jerry Michalek, episode number 29. And if for nothing else, just because Jerry is just an amazing person, but in that specific episode, he had a chat, like a little talk that he gave on vision in the sport, and I thought it was just like mind blower. It's
Right.
still amazing.
I agree with you. I like the podcast you did with Ruben on the long range shooting. I listened to that 2 times, and I tell you, there was another podcast that I listened to twice, and it was because the first time I could not believe the guy had talked that much, and that was the podcast you did with Rick Torres.
Yeah,
Rick is a very quiet guy. He's a pretty humble guy, and when you did that podcast with him, I thought to myself, man, that is the most I've ever heard him talk. So I had to go back because I had missed. He had so much information in there. I had to go back and listen to it a second time. And I'm glad I did because there were things that I picked up the second time I listened to it that I didn't even hear the first time because I was just kind of in shock that he had talked so much. Rick's an awesome guy. I just shot USPSA with him this past weekend down in Lower Delaware, and hearing him in the podcast talk that much really amazed me.
yeah. That that's kind of my experience too. Like I'd met him a couple times, but we hadn't really
Right. Yeah.
talked very much. Obviously, now I know
Right.
why. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's
He's a quiet
episode
guy.
220. That's episode 227. It's a great one with Rick. I like that
Yeah.
one. All right, so I think I have one more to go. Two more to go. And then you mentioned oh yeah, one more to go here. So then you mentioned John McClane. So
Yes.
number 59 was technical aspects of shooting faster with John McClane.
Yes. That's correct.
And we do like he talks a lot about pistol shooting and splits and movement between targets in there. And I thought that one was super valuable too.
Yep.
So those are the ones I gave to Brian. So George, do you have one of your own that you want to throw in there?
I tell you, I think those are 5 great podcasts to start with, Dave. I think the shooter etiquette one is probably the one I would listen to first. I think if you can get that down when you go to a major match or any kind of match, whether it's a local match or major match, you're going to have a better understanding when you get there, and you're not going to have to ask so many questions.
Yeah.
Shooters are very receptive to new folks. I mean, they're certainly loan gear; they will answer any questions. But I have found that there comes a point where you may ask too many questions. I've been that guy where I've asked like a gazillion questions in the beginning, and then I said to myself, "All right, maybe I should just watch a little rather than ask so much." And I picked up just so much observing folks. So I think that would be a great podcast to watch on the etiquette because there are so many things that shooters in this sport will help you with anything. But if they mark you as an individual who won't help reset or some other things like that, then they'll kind of stay away from you, and you'll find that I don't want to say you'll be out on an island, but people won't want to squad with you.
Yeah.
You certainly don't want to be that individual that has people not wanting to squad with you because I've met some lifelong friends in this short time that I've shot this sport. There's guys that I text every day. These guys are um, that we've established this friendship that goes on every day. And if I don't hear from these guys 40 times a day, it's something's wrong. It's just the constant ball busting by these guys, and they were riding me pretty hard before this podcast because I told them I was going to do it with you, and I had to lie to them and tell them that I was doing it at 9 o'clock tonight, and was messing with me already. But it was funny. Um, I think it was the 2013. I went to my first major match. I went and watched the F&H
Hmm.
three gun championship down in Peacemaker that Larry Houck does. And I told my wife, I said, that was phenomenal. I need to go shoot one of these matches. So, of course, I'm sitting on my computer and I'm like refreshing this thing every 7 seconds because I want to get into this Tar Heel three gun match. And I get lucky, I get in the match and it sells out like in 2 minutes. And I get this message one day from this guy. He's like, hey, man, he says, I see that you're a firefighter. He said, oh, I am too. He said, you want to squad together and shoot together? I was like, sure. He had never shot the match before. I had never shot the match before. And I'm talking about Eric Leopold. And I'm looking at this guy's profile picture. And it's this picture of this guy in firefighter gear. And he's riding on like a deer or an elk or something. And I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, this guy's crazy, but it's pretty cool looking. And I kind of dig this. He's got a sense of humor, and we met at that match, and we message each other every day. I mean, and this has been 5, 6 years now. I mean, there's a day go by that I don't hear from him, and there's another guy that between the three of us, Mike Gregorio up in New York, we worked as ROs at the F&H match one year, and we've been buddies ever since. I mean, you meet some awesome folks in this sport, and there's folks that you'll be friends with forever.
Yeah, it's quite incredible the relationships that come out of the shooting sports, and like it would be simple to say that like this sport just attracts like-minded people,
Right.
but I think it's more than that. I think like when you're competing, and you're trying your hardest to put points on the board. It There's just something about that makes and those shared experiences. You have all those memories
Right.
and everything. Just
Yep.
like
Absolutely.
when we were hiding under the awning at Vortex Shooter Source 3 Gun this summer or this
It,
spring.
you guys got me there. I was the last shooter on that stage before the monsoon, typhoon, or whatever you want to call it, came through Texas, and just created this insane flood through the range. And of course, it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but it looks like it's 9 o'clock at night. It had gotten that dark. And I'm like trying to burn through this two bay stage, shot pistol in the one half, and then you have like 60, 64 rounds of rifle in the other half. And I could hardly see through my scope. It was getting so dark. And just when I finished and unloaded and showed clear, the rains opened up. And you guys are all underneath that canopy. And I'm trying to grab all my crap. And I was soaked by the time I got under there. But, it was an awesome memory. So, and like you said, we had a great squad when we shot that match. And I love that match. It's the best match I shot all year.
Yeah, that was a ton of fun,
Yeah.
and that's when I learned like when the ROs start to run, you should probably just follow the ROs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So so George, there's been a lot of matches that I've gone to that I've seen some I guess like I don't know, medical situations. I don't know what you call them, incidents or something like that. I've yet to see anything catastrophic. There's been some close things, but of the volume of matches I've shot, most of the matches are super safe. No one gets hurt. Worst
Right.
things like a little bit of dehydration, sunstroke,
Yep.
twisted
Yep.
ankle, something like that. But there is like the outlier, right? And
Yes.
as a community who prides ourselves on being prepared for anything, you're here to prepare us for that. So let's get into our main topic here. Like, what kind of things have you seen on the range? And maybe you can guide us through like how to deal with those.
You can really break range medical emergencies down into two categories. It would be traumatic injuries or medical emergencies. And I'm glad that we have this opportunity to talk about this because I think that there are some match directors who think ahead and they're very progressive in making sure that there's some sort of EMS standby crew. And then there are some match directors who, they don't think about it because it hasn't happened at their range yet. And I say it hasn't happened yet because it's, anything could happen. It could be anything as something as simple as someone twisted an ankle on a jungle run, or sliding down a ramp that's designed on a tower shooting platform, and an individual breaking their ankle. There's been a lot of things that have happened just in the past couple of years, and what made me really think about this topic and want to talk to you about this. Geez, these guys are blowing my phone up now. I'm gonna have to put it on airplane mode.
Oh yeah, you don't want to
Yeah,
pull a Daniel Jurassic. You're gonna have
yeah,
to
yeah.
silence that.
Hang on, Dave. Let me put it on airplane mode. Sorry.
No
Um,
problem.
so, it's for me. It started with a local club match at Dean DeTurk's range in Topton, Pennsylvania. They had a mix of bird and slugs on the stage, and a gentleman I think had a miss on the target, and he got lost in his count, and he shot a closed piece of steel with a slug. So that slug fragmented and struck a gentleman who was further back uprange in the abdomen. And he had to be transported, if I remember correctly, he had to be transported to the hospital, and they actually had to do surgery in his abdominal area from that slug. And then Chris Weissman, everybody knows Chris. He's RO'd so many matches up and down the East Coast and this side of the Mississippi that he was actually in Texas working a Three Gun Nation match, and he took slug frag. I don't remember if it was from a shotgun slug or if it was from a jacketed bullet slug, but he
Yeah, it
had
was
it
a
actually.
shotgun slug. He was on
Okay,
the shotgun jungle run.
right, and that actually was a through and through wound that went through his wrist. And I remember seeing him in the hospital, and I texted him right away. I was like, "Hey, man, what happened to you?" And he said, "Oh, he said I took a frag. It went through my wrist, came out the other side." And I felt terrible because I was supposed to be at that match, and I was supposed to be shooting that match, and I would have been there, and I would have had stuff with me to help him out. But I had shoulder surgery from an injury at work, and I wasn't there, wasn't able to shoot that match, and to me, it just was a terrible feeling because I felt like, man, I should have been there, should have been helping him. But Chris is a prepared guy. He works in law enforcement. He's had medical training. He had his own tourniquet. He applied it right away, and he had other range officers, I believe, come over and give him a hand and start helping him out. But he remained calm the whole time. Applied pressure to it, and was able to put a tourniquet on there and slow the bleeding down. And and then he was transported to the hospital and did fairly well. But I've also seen simple things as far as like Land. Land went down at the Texas Three Gun Championship. He fell down on stage. It was a huge bay stage that had a mix of rifle, shotgun, and pistol. And I think he fell down somewhere in the middle, running between the two bays, and he sustained a pretty good knee laceration, which was bleeding pretty good. And of course, that red moon dirt at the Reveille Peak Ranch, was like all in his wound. So I was trying to clean that out and just put some gauze and cling and stuff like that on there, just to keep it from bleeding all over the place. And then that same match, um, there was a medical emergency where a gentleman, initially we thought he was in cardiac arrest, but then I think he just had a diabetic emergency. So, that's why I was saying that you can really break these incidents down into either a traumatic or a medical emergency, because it may not be a gunshot wound, or it may not be a fractured ankle or a cut arm or cut leg or something like that, but it could be a diabetic emergency, it could be a cardiac emergency, it could be an anaphylaxis emergency or anything like that. So, I think match directors really need to start being progressive with this, and especially for major matches. Like if you're having a 3-day major matches, is having possibly like an EMS standby crew. Contact your local fire department, your local volunteers, because most of these ranges are so remote. They're so far away from things that it's going to take a while for an EMS crew to get in there. And when you have a traumatic injury or you have a cardiac arrest or something like that, you get into what most folks will call the golden hour. And that's basically the time that you have to get an individual to a hospital for either surgical treatment or something like that, to try to really sustain and preserve their life, and has successful odds with that. Once you start to get out of that time frame, their chances of surviving really go downhill. It's very important to, I guess, to either at least have a standby crew or have them on notice that, hey, we're going to have this major match. We're expecting 300 to 400 people. We have this potential. Can you at least have someone stand by at your station? Most volunteer fire departments or most firefighters across the U.S. are predominantly volunteer. I mean, you're talking 70, almost 70% are volunteer. So if you figure the time that it takes for them to, um, if something were to happen, the time it would take for you to call 911, give all the information in 911 that needs to be reported. They in turn have to dispatch all of the folks. Those folks are either coming from work, they're coming from school, they're coming from home, they're traveling. They have to travel to their volunteer department, get on the apparatus, and then turn around and respond. So you're at least 10 minutes into the incident already. And in the case of Vortex Shooter Source, you're looking at like a 4 mile drive once you turn off the road just to get back to where the ranges are. That's a pretty lengthy distance to travel. So I think it would be very important for match directors to start saying, hey, let's at least have either a crew on standby or let's at least have them on notice that well, this weekend of this month we're going to have this huge event. We're going to have all these folks here, so that they can have some personnel that are available to help out and assist.
Well, I have
And I
a
think
question. Let me jump in with a question
okay,
right
go
there.
ahead.
When you contact like your local fire department, and you're starting to work through this process of having like a standby crew,
Right.
um, I'm assuming like everything in life, there's some sort of cost associated with that.
Um,
Who burden or who's that cost go to?
That's a great question. In the area that I live in, of course, I live in Maryland, so I'm in kind of like the Northeast here. In the county I live in, every department is volunteer except for like where I work. So most of those volunteer departments, they live off of donations basically. They donations to the community, donations for standbys and things like that. So if you build a rapport with them, and you're a major match director, and you're going to be having some funds left over from your match that you're looking to put forward to something, donate them to your volunteer fire department. I mean, those guys are always going to be there. They're operating off shoestring budgets. The equipment, the insurance for the equipment, the insurance for all the apparatus, the EMS equipment, the amount of fuel that it takes to put in these vehicles is all these factors add up. So a lot of these folks rely on fundraisers at their volunteer fire departments. They rely on donations and things like that. Some rely on funding from either the municipality or the county they live in. So I think that if you were a major match director and you said, "Hey, look, I have $200 or $300 that I would love to donate to your department. Is there any way that we could have like a crew standby?" And most people would love to do that because a lot of the volunteer firefighters are doing it not for the money; they're doing it for the opportunity to help their community.
Hmm.
So you may not get somebody all 3 days for 10 to 12 hours a day, but they may have like someone sign up and say, "Hey, I'm willing to help out on Saturday from 8 in the morning until noon," and then somebody else may want to volunteer from noon to whatever. And what else goes a long way is extending that opportunity for those folks to come in and watch, giving them a chance to see what you're doing. A lot of them are going to be interested in it. Most volunteer firefighters are type A personality, just like shooters. They like that adventure and they like that thrill thing. So they're going to want to come in. They're going to watch. Give them a chance to run a demo bay. Let them shoot something. And I think as a younger guy, I would have loved. I would have done it for free for all 3 days if you just said, "Hey, we're going to let you shoot these guns. We just want you to hang out in case something happens. We're going to feed you lunch." You feed somebody lunch and let them do something for free, man. They'll jump all over it.
Well, that sounds pretty cool. So, and I guess the figure you threw out there is like much lower than I expected. So
Well, I say that because most volunteer departments are rural. About 30% are actual paid departments, and most of those are municipalities like cities, counties,
yeah,
things like
which
that.
most of the ranges are not very
Ex-
close to cities, so you're going to probably be
exactly.
dealing with a rural force, right?
Yep, exactly. So, and a lot of volunteer departments have gone to ambulance billing, and they are funding a lot of themselves through the billing that they charge insurance companies for EMS transports. So that generates a lot of funds for a lot of the volunteer departments, and any kind of donations, they love donations. So, donations go a long way, and it doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, if you say, "Hey, look, this is what we'd love to donate to your department. This is what we have," and just give them the opportunity to build that relationship just goes a long way.
Yeah. Okay. So then when we're talking about the okay, so you've done your pre-homework, you've coordinated with the ranges and stuff or excuse me,
Right.
the local EMS. Um if something does happen on the range, a lot of times we have firefighters, we have nurses, we have police officers, we have maybe some former medics, some people with training. So what should be like our response to an incident?
Great question, Dave. And I think this is something that would be very beneficial and helpful to match directors. There's always categories for law enforcement, for military, and things like that. If almost every law enforcement officer has some sort of first aid training, basic CPR, emergency medical training. Some are paramedics. Same with our military folks. Whether they're still active duty or if they're retired, they still have some sort of field medical training. Identify those folks. There's never any emergency services category. Sorry, I always say that and push for that. Um, but
I
if
have I got to stop you there. The Colorado Three Gun Championship, the first 3 years was run by a firefighter EMT, and he changed the category to hometown hero.
is
So
that
it
Kevin?
was, yeah,
Is that
Kevin
Kevin?
Travis. Yeah, so
Okay,
firefighters, military, law enforcement, hometown hero. So,
that's awesome. Lisa Marie Judy, she did that in the very first PCC championship for the Lucas
oh,
Oil
cool.
PCC match, and she had an emergency services category, and that was awesome. But you know what? When you have those folks, if you identify them at sign up on practice score, you know, make a little note in the stage, in the nooks or the iPads or whatever you're using that, these folks have medical training. So that way, if you're running your major match and you have it broken down into zones or you have different sides of the range, you can identify those folks that maybe have an asterisk next to their name or they have some kind of identifier next to their name that says these individuals have medical training. So that way, if something occurs on that stage or the stage next to them, you can radio the RO on that stage and say, "Hey, send shooter XYZ over to my stage. I need help." And most of the time, something happens. Everybody knows that when that walkie-talkie goes off on that range, most people perk up anyway and listen to what's going on. And the case was the Texas Three Gun Championship when that gentleman had that medical emergency. I thought Kirk Gruber did an outstanding job. He had it already established, and he brought it up in the match director's briefing that if there was a medical emergency, the range was going to shut down. They were going to stop, shooting on each stage until the EMS folks came in, did their treatment and then transport, and then they were going to start and resume activities. And I thought that was very smart on Kirk's part, and I thought it was very proactive. I thought that was great that he had the foresight to think of that. And I'd love to see every match director, every major match director, every local match director do that. Most local matches turn over match directors every 2 or 3 years because guys get burned out, and I understand that. It's a lot of commitment, involvement. So I think that just because you're proactive, make sure that you pass it on to the next guy. Someone else takes over for you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. All right, so what do you think is like the typical thing that you see on the range, as far
Um,
as like an emergency? Because so I'll be honest, like aside from the Wiseman thing, like I haven't seen a gunshot injury yet.
right,
And I don't know how you'd consider that, and like I hate to bring that up because someone, there's always the you're like, well, is that a gunshot wound? Someone's like, oh, well, he could have died. Like,
right.
yeah, but like if he did and we had to write the autopsy, what would we call that? So that's the point I'm making is like what specifically um should we look for? Because luckily, and because we have all these safety measures in place in our
Right.
sport, gunshots are like really, really rare.
Yeah, and that's great because, the ROs are outstanding. When you get a lot of ROs who are dedicated to those matches that show up on a continuous basis.
Hmm.
They show up every month to run those local matches, or they show up every major match to run those matches, and they're very safety conscientious. They're looking for fingers in the trigger guards. They're looking for unsafe gun handling all the time, and that's why most of those matches are so safe. And I agree with you. There are very few like major incidents where you actually see someone who is shot. And although it does occur, and you see it on YouTube all the time, but that's usually guys who, I hate to say it, who they go out there and they're videotaping themselves, and they get to the range 2-3 times a year, and they don't handle the guns as much as most three gun competitors or any kind of competitive shooter. And I don't want to say that they become lax or lazy with it, but they don't handle the firearm as much, and they become complacent with their own safety measures. Um, but I think that most of the time you're going to see less traumatic injuries. You're going to see the cuts either to fingers or arms or legs, whether it's from rocks or from brush on a jungle run. You're going to see the burned fingers from hot shotguns on an all jungle run stage. You're going to see those traumatic injuries that are not life-threatening traumatic injuries. You'll see more medical injuries. There's a lot of a lot of juniors in the sport, but then on the flip side, you've got a lot of seniors and super seniors in our sport. So the potential for a cardiac emergency, diabetic emergency, or anything like that is higher. And I also think it's kind of specific to the area that you're in. Um, I'm coming from the East Coast where it's hot and humid all the time in the summer. It's cold in the winter. When I go out west, the air's a lot drier. So my allergies are going to be different to the stuff out west for Western matches than what they're going to be in the East. And then same for someone who comes from the West Coast and travels to the East Coast. They're going to suffer some kind of anaphylaxis emergency or something like that they're not used to because of an allergy to pollen or to a plant or to a bee sting or something like that.
I gotcha. So then how do you prepare for that type of thing? Like if so, like you said, a lot of us are super type A type people.
Right,
We want to be the guy that is there with the Leatherman when someone needs, a box opened or something like that.
right,
So
right.
what kind of things can like the average person do to be prepared for situations like that?
I think the first thing to do is not be scared to act. There's a thing called the Good Samaritan law that protects individuals. All 50 states have them. They vary in different regions. So just because if you don't have the specific medical training that an individual may require, you are protected if you are acting in a reasonable, prudent manner to assist that individual. If their life is in danger, if they're incapacitated, if you try to assist them and you do something and you're negligent, you were acting in a reasonable manner to try to help that individual, and that somewhat protects you under the Good Samaritan law. You briefly said that you had some training, some medical training, but you didn't want to be the individual that would have to act. And I think that I hear you say that, Dave, but I think if something happened on your squad, I think you would jump right in.
Hmm.
You're that kind of guy. I had an opportunity to shoot with you at Vortex Shooter Source, and I got that feel from you right there that you're the kind of guy who's not going to stand back and watch something happen to somebody, and you're going to rely on your training. It's never happened to you, but you would be surprised that you will subconsciously react and start doing things based off the training that you've had. And you'll kind of say to yourself, "Wow, I didn't think I could do that." But you will react and you'll do what you've been trained to do. So I think that is important. Being proactive by individuals. There are a lot of great courses out there. There's a lot of great tactical casualty courses out there. My friend Andy Snyder, he teaches courses over here. He's a law enforcement individual, but he also flies on as a medic on a helicopter. So he does a great tactical casualty course. He also has taught a lot of medical courses for our local club at York. And there's a club just outside of like Reading, Pennsylvania, called Anilani, and they're actually going to have him come in and do a basically a first aid casualty course training class for all of their ROs because they're going to start a point series. So they're being proactive by having Andy come in and teach a training class for their ROs that they know that they're going to have at these matches. And I think that's great. I think that almost every match, every club they have a dedicated group that shows up all the time.
Yeah.
Those are the folks that you want to say, hey, look, we're going to teach these guys CPR, if nothing else, basic CPR. We're going to teach these guys first aid or a tactical casualty care course, or even a stop the bleed course. There's some great courses out there. Stop the bleed is kind of a very I don't want to say low impact, but it's a down and dirty how to apply a tourniquet, how to apply an occlusive tress seal for a gunshot sucking chest wound, how to apply direct pressure to stop dense bleeding, things like that. Um, so the things that we're always looking for is our main concern is, our, of course, our ABCs, our airway, breathing, and circulation, and of course, dense bleeding. Being so, that's going to teach you how to recognize those things and how to do things. I don't want to say at a minimalist level, but how to handle those things at a basic level where you don't need like a full blown EMT or paramedic course or things like that.
Hmm.
Speaking of Andy, Andy and I were shooting a match, a shotgun PCC match back in August, and Andy had moved from one shooting position to the next, and all of a sudden he goes down, and I'm thinking to myself, what the heck just happened? I thought maybe he twisted his ankle, but he actually had a knee injury. He sustained a knee injury and had to have ACL surgery from that. And of course, I'm there and I had my bag with all my stuff in it, but that's not the kind of traumatic injury where you have, say, a fracture and exposed bone, where you can treat that by applying traction and applying bandages, things like that. So, and of course, there's not much I can do other than tell Andy to keep his head out of the mud, because,
Yeah.
Andy's a medic, and he's in serious pain. And right away, I thought to myself, all right, I don't want him putting his head down in the mud. But there's not a lot that I could do for him. I mean, other than, I had an ace bandage, we had some ice packs, things like that. But, Andy recognized the signs and symptoms and what he had going on. And he said, hey, I'm done. I've got to go to the hospital. I've got to get this checked out. And that's what he did. Um, but, it was one of those things. I was there and I had the equipment, but that type of emergency, there's not much I can do. So,
Yeah, like, you almost have, like, the wrong tools for the job
yeah,
kind of thing there.
absolutely. Those are things that need to be treated at a hospital because you got to have an MRI or you got to have an X-ray or something like that, and that's not something you're going to do in the field. So I think there's a lot of great field type classes, and of course, you certainly want to check them out before you sign up for a course. I have an instructor come in. There are a lot of, we've all seen the YouTube videos of, especially like the guy at the indoor range, and he's holding that hand cannon revolver and he's talking to a group of like
Yeah.
people, and all of a sudden the thing, he just has an AD and he plays it off. So of course, you have other individuals who, they will tell you that they are like first aid instructors and things like that, but make sure you vet them before you have them come in and teach your organization a class. Word of mouth is great. Usually when someone does an outstanding job, other clubs will say, "Hey, we had this guy come in and teach this course for us. He's an outstanding instructor." So that's one way to do it. But definitely, investigate these individuals and check them out. Make sure before you have them come in and teach a course. Make sure they're certified. That's one thing. If you're having somebody come in and do like CPR, make sure they're certified from either the American Heart Association or ASHI or an organization like that. And
I
like a CPR course is not very expensive.
Yeah. Well, and if CPR course is not very expensive, and if you can get like your whole club together, your
Yes.
shooting club together to do it, that's probably a really good way to do it. And I guess I hadn't really thought of that, of like bringing the instructor to the club instead
Yep.
of
Yeah.
going out and sending like 5 and 6 dudes out to go get certified in that case. But that's a really good point.
Oh yeah, it's more, it's more cost effective that way. If you can bring an individual to come in and teach a group versus sending the group out to the individual, you're certainly going to save a lot of money. And speaking of clubs, I think it's very important that clubs have um, EMS equipment on standby there. Most of the time, you'll see like a little plastic first aid kit that somebody buys at like a Walmart or a Target or something like that. And that's going to have your basic gauze, like your 2x2, 4x4 dressings, an ace bandage, some tape, things like that. But there's equipment that you can get. There's a company called North American Rescue. I have some of their stuff, and I don't certainly don't work for them, and I'm not plugging them. I know they make some great products. There's a lot of great products on the market. There's so many different tourniquets out there. There's probably a dozen different tourniquets. You can get them in different colors if you want. They make them for one-handed use, for two-handed use. There's certainly some that that I looked at and I was like, heck no, there's no way I would buy that and even use it because I didn't like the way their YouTube video was on how they applied the thing. But then there are other tourniquets that I've used in training and in the field and things like that that are proven, and a lot of that comes from our military. Our military folks have been very successful with casualty treatment in the battlefield. I mean, you got to figure we've been at war now in the Middle East for what 16, 17 years now. So a
Yeah.
lot of the things that we're seeing now being used in back here in the states are because of the success that's been happening overseas. We're seeing a lot of these classes that are coming up because these are basically combat casualty courses that apply to us here at the States because of what we're seeing with mass shootings and things like that. And it doesn't matter, if you don't have to be overseas. You could be at your church. I mean, look how many shootings have happened at churches, at malls, at schools, and things like that. I mean, these are things that just because you think it won't happen to you or in your area, the potential is there and it could happen. So being progressive and taking a class, if not for to help someone else, but to help yourself or help your family while you're at the mall or while you're at church is I think is a great investment.
Yeah, definitely. And did joke earlier that you don't want me responding to it, but I just meant that there's like a lot of people that have a lot more experience in that arena than me. But I did go out and seek that education because
Right,
of how much I shoot, and
right,
how much I'm around guns. And so I thought,
absolutely,
if this is going to be something that's part of my lifestyle, which I really enjoy, so I want it to be, then I should probably take some measures to plug holes if one shows up someday.
right, absolutely, and there's jobs for everybody. I mean, just because you don't want to jump in and do any kind of treatment on an individual. My buddy Blaze, he says all the time. He says, "Look, if something happens, I'll be the guy who goes to the gate and meets the EMS crew and directs them back to the stage."
Yeah, that's
And
an
I think
important point.
absolutely, because most of these ranges are so spread out. I mean, you could like at Blue Ridge or at the Triple C range or at the Reveille Peak Ranch. I mean, you're driving several miles across areas just to get from one side of the range to the other. So, and of course, your EMS crew may not be familiar with that, but that goes back to where you have that relationship with your volunteer department or whoever your EMS provider is in your area, and you bring them in and you say, all right, here's our range layout. These are where our bays are. These are where our natural terrain areas are. This is where our office is, where we will have like a rally point if there's a medical emergency, or this is where we will use as a landing zone if we have to have aviation come in for some reason and transport because the transport time is going to be too long by ground. So these are things that should be established ahead of time by the match director or whoever's running the match, whether it's the match director or the range master. I mean, these guys should all be involved in that. That's information they should all know ahead of time up front.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we've got like a plan to coordinate with local EMS. We've sent out or we brought in an instructor to
Yeah.
teach interested parties in our club to handle emergency situations. What's like some next steps? And you kind of mentioned some first aid items there.
Yes.
Is that a rabbit trail we want to go down to talk
Um,
about some products that we should be keeping with us?
absolutely. There's a lot of things. You know, you get kind of two different folks who show up at the range. You get the competitive folks who, they'll have like race gear set up, and then you get the folks who are showing up in like a battle belt setup,
Hmm.
like, and I don't want to say zombie hunters or like end of the world type apocalyptic shooters, but and I get that because that may be what those individuals use at work or how they train for their job. So I get that, and they may not want to try to be in the top 5 or the top 10 with competitive race gear. They may want to run their work gear or things like that. So there are things that I think I don't want to say everyone should have, but I think if you want to really be progressive and have some sort of training to help out, I think at a minimum you need to have at least a tourniquet, have some kind of combat dressing like an Israeli trauma dressing, or some sort of quick clot type gauze, because I was talking about a stop and bleed class that if there is for some reason either a gunshot or there's a penetrating injury, And it doesn't have to be from a gunshot. It could be because you're running a jungle run and you trip and fall, and you impale yourself on a stick or a rock or something like that. If you have an arterial bleed or you have a venous bleed, you're going to want to pack that wound. So you're going to want to pack it with um, like a combat gauze or a quick clot gauze, because you want to stop that bleeding. You want to put pressure on that wound. So you want to have those type of things as well. They're just as important as a tourniquet. And I see a lot of people, they'll wear just a tourniquet on their belt and their belt set up. And for me, I don't understand why they have that on their competition belt, because it's like the only piece of gear they're carrying. That's
Hmm.
great. That's great if you have like a traumatic injury to an extremity, like your arm or your leg. Um, but what are you going to do if it's not something you're going to use a tourniquet on? There are other things you should have. I carry 2 bags with me daily. I carry this little small bag right here. It's basically set up with um, one tourniquet. Um, it's a cat tourniquet.
Hmm.
So this is basically a one-handed deployment. It works off of Velcro. You can slip this over your arm or your leg and basically apply pressure with it, pull it tight, and then it has a windlass on here. And once you apply that, you're going to tighten this down and lock it in. They make these where they're plastic. They make them where they're aluminum. That's a very important piece of equipment. In addition, in this little bag, I mean, there's a lot of things in here. There's like a combat applied dressing that you can use. It's basically like an ace bandage, but it also has a plastic bracket, like a kind of like a U-shaped bracket. So as you're wrapping this around an arm or a leg and you're applying pressure to that combat gauze, you are tightening this thing down, and then it locks down over that plastic bracket and basically holds itself on there.
Is
Um,
that's similar to like an Israeli bandage, right? They have
yes,
that little
exactly.
plastic thing in
Yep,
there.
yep. Israeli trauma dressing. Now this is an inclusive dressing right here. This is made by North American Rescue. This is called the hyphen vent. So this is basically for like a sucking chest wound. If there's a penetrating wound to the chest, basically what you'll get is you'll get air into that cavity, that chest cavity, which will create like a pneumothorax or tension pneumothorax, things like that. So you need to basically close up that puncture wound in the chest. Either if it's a gunshot wound, you certainly want to make sure that you check for an entry and an exit wound, because you don't want to just do the front of your chest that you can see that injury. You also have to check their back and see if it exited, because that hole could be in their back as well.
Hmm.
So in addition to that, I just have some like soft trauma type like gauze and bandages and things like that. Now this right here is this is that quick clot combat gauze that I was talking about. This is kind of like in a Z fold. So you basically start stuffing the wound hole with this, and you're basically jamming it in with your finger, kind of like this. And I hate to do that on camera, but you're packing this wound full of this gauze bandage. And what you're
Somebody
doing is
please make a meme.
yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're trying to create and fill that void space with this gauze that's going to react and seal that wound off and create that pressure.
Yeah, we
Just as
did that in one of the TC3 classes
yeah,
I took with like I don't remember exactly what animal it was, but it was like a pork roast
right, yeah,
that the instructor, shot a hole through or drilled a hole through. I don't even know how he made the hole. But then yeah, we had to pack that thing with
yeah.
the gauze that comes out in the little Z format like you were talking about there.
Man, you went to a great class if your instructor went through all that trouble and had that prop. Most of the
Yeah,
time, you just get like a rubber arm with like a moulage kit and a bottle full of fake blood, and they're squeezing it through the hole. But
yeah,
just
I've done a
important.
couple, and one was a former ranger, and one was gosh, what do they call the Navy guy that hangs out with the
McCorman,
Marines?
McCorman,
Corpsman. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and one
yeah.
was a corpsman. So yeah, they were like legitimate dudes.
Right. Simple things like rubber gloves. You certainly you want to protect yourself. Scene safety is a huge thing. That's one of the things that I probably didn't mention earlier, but that's something that really needs to be taken into consideration for any kind of emergency, whether it's a medical emergency or whether it's a traumatic injury. Because if you're bending over to pick up a piece of steel to reset it, and all of a sudden you're bit by a rattlesnake or some kind of other venomous snake, depending upon what part of the region you're in, if you go down, I certainly don't want to come in to help you and get bit myself, because then if I go down, then I've compounded the problem. So
Good
scene
point.
safety is a huge, important thing. In the same aspect of, it could be something that's energized, and the individual touches a piece of metal, not knowing that it's energized with electricity, and they become shocked or electrocuted. We certainly don't want to go and touch that individual or touch that same thing. So scene safety is a huge thing, and that should have been mentioned foremost and right up front, as well as operating under your jurisdictional protocols in your area. For me, I'm an EMT here in the state of Maryland. I'm not a nationally registered EMT, so for me, if I were to be in Texas or Pennsylvania or something like that, I would be covered under the Good Samaritan law, because I'm going to act to the training that I have. I certainly am not certified in that other state, but I would be covered under the Good Samaritan law if I do act and help an individual. Um, and I'm certainly not going to do anything outside of my scope of training. There are some individuals who, their protocols under their medical director allows them to do things that other individuals in a different region may not be able to do. So it's important to understand, if you're an EMT or if you're operating under a first aid certification, that you know what your local laws are, and you know what your protocols are, that what will allow you to operate and do. So I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked there.
No,
This
that's an important sidetrack.
Yeah, and there's one other bag that I carry daily. My wife makes fun of me for this. She calls it my merce. I call it my satchel. I think it was good enough for Indiana Jones. It's good enough for me. It's just a little sling bag. I carry this thing every day with me. It's got my concealed carry firearm in the back pocket when it's not on me. On the front pocket, I have like a battery charger for my phone if I need to charge that, because when you're out on the range, you're kind of in areas where you're searching for service, so it depletes your battery a lot. If you need to call 911, you certainly want to make sure you have a charged phone for that. I carry spare mags in here, a flashlight, Sharpie marker. Sharpie is very important, because if you do apply that tourniquet or you do some kind of treatment, you want to certainly mark down the time that it was applied. I've even gone as far as like marking down my initials, because for the local folks who know me, they'll know who applied that tourniquet or that dressing, and that way, if there's any questions, they can come back to me and reference that and ask it. And then also, in this bag, I keep two of everything that I have in that small bag. Two Cat 5 tourniquets, two Israeli trauma dressings, a this is a different brand, but this is like the same thing. It's a clotting sponge that you would apply to a dressing. I keep a like an emergency space blanket type Mylar blanket in here, just because it's warm during the day doesn't mean that it's going to be cold at night. And if you have an injury late in the afternoon, an individual may become hypothermic or something like that. So I also have, like cleaning and gauze and things like that. But the one thing that's kind of hasn't been mentioned, and a lot of times you don't see, is a pocket barrier face mask for CPR. They make this is a little bit bigger one. They make smaller disposable ones. This basically covers an individual's mouth and nose. It's kind of like a little air inflated bladder that creates a really good seal. Um, Kind of pops into place here so you can get an idea. And the rubber strap, the strap goes underneath her head, and it has a port you can hook oxygen up to. But it has a one-way valve on here, one-way clapper valve. Because a lot of times when you do CPR, whatever that individual has in their stomach, when you're pushing on their chest and you're pumping air into them, a lot of times that stuff comes back up.
Mm.
So you don't want it coming back up in your mouth. It's very disgusting when you're spitting out someone's lunch or their dinner. So having a one-way valve pocket face mask or barrier protective device is very important. They make them small enough that you can put on your keychain now. So that's one other piece of equipment that I would make sure I have, especially if you're CPR certified, is to have a one-way or a barrier device that, even if it's disposable, just to protect yourself. Because that all comes down to the whole scene safety thing. You're there to protect yourself and your family, and that you certainly don't want to contract anything and take it home, or any kind of hazmat incident, take it
Yeah,
home with you.
that's a good point. So,
Yep.
okay, so I made a list of the stuff that you have in your small bag, and then you carry doubles in your large, plus
Yep.
your
Yep.
CPR device. So cat tourniquet, gauze, quick clot, Israeli dressing, chest seal, bandages, combat gauze, and rubber gloves. So
Yep.
one
One
thing that
other
I
thing,
found
one
out.
other one
Oh,
other
go
thing,
ahead.
Dave, is a good pair of scissors, good pair of shears. These are some heavy duty shears. These will cut right through like denim, jeans, jean jacket, leather, anything like that. Because if you do have an arm injury, you have a traumatic leg injury, we need to expose that space in order to be able to treat it. So you want to make sure that you're able to cut away that clothing or garment or whatever that individual is wearing to be able to get access to that area and treat it.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So, all this stuff is like first aid supplies, right? And
Hmm.
if you work for like a large corporation that has like a standard medical plan, a lot of times you'll have like a flexible spending account.
Yep.
And so I had one of those when I worked at Lockheed Martin, and I never went to the doctor. So at the end of the year, I always ended up with like this like pool of money that I had nothing to do with. So
Right.
what I would do is I would buy like these combat gauze, Israeli bandages, quick clot, shit like that,
Right.
and that's all first aid stuff. And then I would package them up, and so I've got like five little kits, several in the house, couple
Right.
in the trailer, in the truck, shooting bags, stuff like that. And finally, like I started giving them away to my shooting buddies as gifts because like I had so many of them.
Right.
So that's kind of like a creative little thing. So if you have like a flexible spending account too, you can get like first aid supplies reimbursed on that. So that'll I guess it's your own money. So instead of letting it lapse, it'll help you keep it. So all right,
Yeah,
what do we got?
it's a shame that this day and age that like myself, I feel like I have to carry that with me every day,
Hmm.
because if something happens to someone in front of me and I don't have equipment with me to help them, the guilt that I'm going to have of, hey, I wasn't able to perform and do my job. So I carry stuff with me every day now, and it's sad that it's come to that. But for anything else, it's for me and my family. A peace of mind for me and my family every time we go somewhere that I have something to treat them or help them if something happens. And you brought up a great point. There's a lot of companies. Um, you can buy first aid kits. You can buy active shooter kits. You can buy like dense bleeding kits, things like that. They will sell prepackaged kits. I know the county. I work part time for a technical rescue team here in my county. We do everything from confined space to trench rescue to structural collapse to swift water rescue. To high ankle rope rescue, and we continuously train with to stop the bleeding, things like that. And even though most of the folks are paid firefighters, we still do the simple training like stop the bleeding, that, and they have actually bought these kits that they keep in every county vehicle. And what it is, it's basically an active shooter bag, and it has like it'll have like six of these small kits in there, and they'll be all velcroed in that kit. So that way you can deploy these smaller kits out in a mass casualty situation. And they have been forward with the fact that nationwide they're trying to be proactive with having a a I hate to say like a rapid intervention team, but I like to use the joke that there's first responders and second responders, and of course the first responders are our law enforcement folks, and they love to tell you that they're the first responders and that the fire department guys are the second responders. So there's always that rivalry, but what they're doing nationwide is they're trying to create these rapid intervention teams that if there's a mass casualty situation or mass shooting, that they provide a quick response team of 2 to 4 individuals, basically 4 individuals, more than two, of a law enforcement officer, two medical personnel, and then a law enforcement officer. And you're basically going in with these folks, and some departments have issued bulletproof vests to their providers, but a lot of areas don't because they can't afford that. Um, so we have training here in the county that I live in that they're trying to create these teams that will be able to go in and handle a mass casualty or mass shooting situation where you're going in with a law enforcement officer. They're providing the neutralization of the shooter. You're providing the medical treatment to the victims. So they will clear an area. You will go in. They will provide safety and security for you while you treat patients, and that allows them to do their main job. instead of focusing on treatment patients, and it allows them to find these shooters, and they're having success with it because they're being proactive with it by engaging right away. They're not standing back and waiting till the building's clear and then bringing EMS folks in. They're bringing them in faster, and they're getting these individuals treated faster with tourniquets and with the Israeli trauma dressings and things like that. And they're having higher success rate with saving lives that way. So a lot of folks are starting to go to that, and that takes some stones to go in there when you don't have a firearm, when you're
Yeah.
used to shooting all the time. So you have to build that rapport with your local departments as well, your police departments. Last month I did some training with these guys, and it was like a multi-jurisdictional police training where there was folks in the state police, there was the county sheriffs there were local police departments, and these guys, of course, I'm sure they know each other from working in the county, but I was impressed at the speed at which they were engaging the hostile individual, and the speed at which they were applying these tourniquets, because every one of these guys carried a minimum one tourniquet on them, either on their duty belt or in basically like an ankle holster type thing for a tourniquet. Um, so that was my first experience with that, and seeing those guys act, and I thought, these guys are high speed and they're on top of it. And it's great that they're doing this, and they're training this way. But they're relying on us to come in and do everything else. This having a small bag like that and keeping it with you all the time is, you don't have to think that it's for gunshot wounds only. I mean, it could be for anything. It could be because you cut your arm or your leg or whatever. And I think just, if you have a little bit of medical training, be prepared. Be prepared just to take care of yourself and your neighbor, your coworker, or your family member that's with you.
Yeah, and I like what you say about being prepared to take care of your neighbors and family members, because when you think about like human nature, we're tribal by nature, right? If
Right.
you're the head of a household, your family is your tribe, your
Yep.
neighborhood is your extended tribe, right? So
Yep.
yeah, if you can't, unfortunately, you can't like save everybody, right?
Right.
Even if you want to. So I guess taking steps to ensure the safety of the people you care most about and the people that are close to you on a daily basis is probably a good way to start, and that includes like your squad on the range. It includes
Right.
the people that you shoot with in your local club, things like that.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point where if you do have to act, you do have to treat somebody and help them. You also have to mentally prepare yourself that even if you perform at the best of your ability, the outcome may not be what you want it to be. It may not be what you were trained to see or to have happen. Individuals may still die even if you do your best to treat them and help them. And that's a tough thing for people to get past. Especially if they don't see it every day and do it every day. It's hard for them because they feel like what could I have done? It's a coulda, shoulda, woulda thing. What could I have done? What should I have done? What should I have done differently? Why didn't I do this? And they beat themselves up over that. And that's a tough hurdle for individuals to get through. And I think that I give the utmost respect to the individuals who don't do it every day, but when they need to, they jump in and they help out. And then you have to be mentally prepared to know that even if you do your best, it may not be the outcome you want for an individual.
Yeah, that's true, and that's like a reality that folks like you face every day. So it's I don't know. It's tough when you sit around and think about these topics, especially if it's not something that you do professionally, right? Because
Right.
like most of
Right.
us like to think we live in a carefree and fun world. So is
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's and I hate to say it, but I feel like my kids sometimes are sheltered because I kind of live out in a country setting, and my kids are not exposed to some of the things that I was exposed to when I was a kid and going through school. And of course, they don't think that a lot of these things will happen to them. And I try to reiterate this all the time with them. My oldest daughter, she's a freshman. She's seeing some of these things. I've always said that she's book smart and she's sidewalk stupid because she doesn't have that real world life experience where she's seeing some of these things that's going to traumatize her and make her wake up and see the reality of what people can do to other people. Um, so I've tried to like teach them as much as I can and prepare them as much as I can, and you just hope that they're never in that situation, but if they are, that they are able to rely on what you've taught them. Um, and the sad thing is you didn't see these things 15, 20 years ago when we were in school, or well, of course, for me it was a lot longer than that. But a lot of these folks are that are on the range. They've been out of school 10, 15 years, but they've come up at an age where everything is on social media is instant. It's instant feedback.
Hmm.
You're seeing things as they happen. Of course, 15, 20, 30 years ago, you had to wait until the 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news to see what the hell happened on the other side of the world, where now you're getting it instantly. And I think that's exposed a lot of people. And I think it's desensitized a lot of people to what happens, and they see it daily now. So they just think, oh, it's just another thing that's happening, and it doesn't shock them or traumatize them the way it should, when they're exposed to it.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. Like I think about um, did, there was a VHS video series when I was younger called Faces of Death.
Yes.
And,
Yep.
and if
I
you knew,
remember that.
you remember that? Okay, yeah.
Yep.
So if you knew someone who had one or had like a VHS or whatever, and you saw it, like I remember hearing like how bad it was. But when you think about like today in the news, like they don't they don't
Right.
even think twice about showing dead bodies on television. So yeah, I think
Oh
it does
yeah. That
desensitize people to it.
that Faces of Death, that was like taboo to watch. I mean, it was like almost like going into the X-rated section of the movie store when you were renting out
Yeah, and now you can
a
find like worse
Cineplex.
shit on YouTube.
Right. Yeah. I mean, here's this biggest thing. The last week they've been talking about this Momo challenge thing, and it's like, what the hell? Kids today shouldn't be watching kids YouTube and then have some kind of made up character telling them how to commit suicide. It's just unbelievable the things that kids are exposed to today that we never saw as kids. Of course, when we were kids, you were always outside on your bike. You didn't have a cell phone in your hand where you could look at everything instantly.
Yeah. Yeah, do you remember like endless summers spent like riding your bike everywhere and
Yeah.
jumping like little creeks and shit like that and
Oh,
fishing?
and
Like
the ramps that you made with your bikes, and the
yeah.
worst thing that ever happened to you is when you had metal pegs on your bike and it would just spark the skin right up your shin. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you should have these little trauma kits, when you were a kid. When I was a kid, they knew me by first name in the ER. I used to carry my file folder around with me, and of course my wife laughs all the time. She said, "If anything's ever going to happen, it always happens to you," and she's right. I mean, it doesn't matter. I could be standing in a group of 50 people, and something will fall and hit me in the head, and nobody else will be affected. It's it's I laugh because like working for the fire department has been the best job I've ever had, but it's also been the hardest one on me physically, on my body. I've fallen off of roofs, I've fallen off of ladders, I've fallen through attics, fallen like in through basements, been burned. I had a shoulder injury that required surgery that still to this day, 3 years later, 5 years later after the original injury, it still bothers me where I can't even pick my arm up all the way and raise it over my head. Um, so it's been the greatest job I ever had, but it's also been the hardest on me, injury wise. But, it's something I certainly wouldn't trade because every day I go to work is a different day. So
Yeah.
it's not that mundane, oh, Monday through Friday, it's the same monotony of work. It's every day is a different day, and people doing stupid stuff is what keeps us in business.
Yeah, there's no shortage of business for
Right.
you either.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so George, we've covered a lot here, and I think we've given people like a pretty good outline of like how to create like a strategy for like
Right.
their club or their major match or something like that. Is there
Right.
anything that we haven't covered that you want to make sure to get out there?
Um, you know, as far as like something we may have missed, um, certainly we really didn't touch a whole lot on like medical emergencies. CPR is a huge thing. I think that a match director should learn, should have other individuals that are going to be dedicated to their club or their crew learn. It's fairly inexpensive, and it's an important skill that not only can be used on the range but off the range. I think a basic first aid class would be great in the same respect because, like I said, it's not as much like traumatic injuries. It's a lot of medical injuries. They kind of seem to tip the scale there on the balance of things. Anything from someone choking on something they're eating Dehydration is a huge thing. You got to figure most folks are out on the range 10 to 12 hours a day, especially the hardworking RO crews.
Yeah.
So they get dehydrated. Um, you get folks like I heard talking when you were doing the Wyoming Governor's Cup podcast, folks who like coming from the East Coast are not used to that altitude. So they're getting some kind of altitude sickness. So those are emergencies that you don't think about, you don't prepare for. So I think that just having someone to be a medical officer or a medical designee to handle these situations and think of these things um, would really help match directors. If you dedicate one individual that you know is a law enforcement or military or firefighter or something like that, and say, hey, I know you're going to be working this match. I want you to handle these emergencies. Give that individual a radio. Have them travel around with the range master if they have to in a UTV or something, and just go from stage to stage and handle things for you. That would take a huge burden off of the match director and off of the range master. Um, and I think it would be a great thing to have for those individuals. I mean, those are you're going to see more medical emergencies, I think, than any kind of traumatic injury like a gunshot wound or anything like that. I think you'll end up seeing more bee stings and things than you'll see just based on statistics of any kind of gunshot wound.
Yeah, I can vouch for the bee
Sorry.
sting thing. I've taken a bee sting to the eye before in Forest Lake, and
Right.
luckily I had a firefighter EMT on my squad, the RO squad, whose
Right.
wife that was a nurse was there. So
Right.
they helped me out for sure. But I'm reminded of the Big Ben Blast and Dash, the 5K running gun that we held this year in or I guess last year in Colorado. And there's two local guys that are, well, there's several local guys that are firefighters, but two individuals in particular that were going to run the match. And we asked them, hey, would you guys consider running one of y'all in the morning, one of y'all in the afternoon, and then working the match with
Right.
us? Because especially with like a running gun, we were expecting bruises and scrapes and rolled ankles, and
Right.
we were hoping for the best, that no one would actually have a heart attack or something like that. And we got lucky. But yeah, we were expecting like rolled ankles and minor bruises and things like that. But we did have a plan in place, and those guys roamed the range in a pickup truck before they were ready to shoot. One did it after he shot. So um, I felt like we had a pretty good plan in that case. And unfortunately, that's like this same situation that you hear or that we're sitting here talking about is like a very rural range. So
Right.
the response time, if something did happen, would be quite long.
Yeah, and that you bring up a great point. A lot of these matches now are starting to be like an endurance type match. Look at the Hard as Hell that started at SUPS, and now you have the Hard as Hell Texas edition, and then the Rock Hard match that just occurred this
Yeah.
past week. You're subjecting these folks to physical stresses on their bodies that they're not used to shooting in a normal match, and those are the classic matches right there that you're going to see those ankle injuries. You're going to see those broken legs or arms from props and things like that. I think probably the worst um, injury I saw was at a F&H USA three gun championship match in Peacemaker. Larry Houck was running it. He had an elevated platform that you're shooting long range from, and then he had this like wooden slide made, and it had like a piece of vinyl linoleum or some kind of kitchen flooring on it. And I mean, you just hauled ass down this thing. I mean, it was you literally had to put your feet out on the sides to try to slow yourself down. And an older gentleman, I won't mention his name because I didn't talk to him before this and I don't know if he would be upset or not, but he kind of came down really fast and he ended up sustaining an ankle fracture that required surgery. And he was shooting at he's from New Jersey and he's shooting a local club match. And I was talking to him about it and he said, that was me that fell down that slide. He said, I broke my ankle. And he showed me and it was a pretty traumatic wound that he had there. And I mean, he had a pretty good scar from it. And those are, props are great. I love props. I love shooting with props and doing different things. But we're starting to see the combination of like a Tough Mudder type shooting match
Hmm.
involved in some of these matches now, and I think that's great because you're trying to evolve your match. You're trying to make it better than what you had it last year. So these are things that certainly, if you're going to plan that, that you make your match bigger and better, also plan on a contingency that if there's an emergency that you're able to handle it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as you were talking there about props, I'm reminded. I want to say it was Rock Castle, but there was one place where we got to like a truck as a shooting position, and the day before, it was afternoon, and so I was taking up a position, and I don't even know, maybe I had like a hoodie on or something like that. But then, during shooting day, I go take up that same position, and like the backs of my arms are on this truck that's been in this hot sun all day,
Yeah.
and it's like ah.
Yes.
So yeah, like
Yeah.
they're barricades and with splinters and stuff like that, slides with breaking ankles. There's all kinds of stuff to worry about with props out there.
Sorry, Dave. I'm not hearing you, but these tiny holes are texting me like I've got like 30 text messages from these ding dongs that I mentioned earlier, and they're sending me these messages and they're talking about things that we've discussed when we were RO matches, and and I'm sorry, it caught me off guard, and made me laugh when I just read one of the texts.
Yeah, that's
But
totally fine.
but what you bring up a great point. As far as the conditions that change throughout the day. Like say if you're shooting at Rock Castle in the morning, you may have heavy fog and frost on a vehicle,
Hmm.
and then later in the afternoon when the sun's up, you could have that hot metal. So certainly that's something to consider. The changing environment and the changing conditions you're in throughout the day. And again, there again, if you're shooting in a PM squad, later in the evening, that it's going to be cooler quicker. So, you have to be prepared as well, not only for like a medical emergency, but you have to prepare as a shooter to have, the right clothing, the right items you need for the environment you're going to be in. And I see a lot of people, like especially when you're flying the matches, you're trying to consolidate your items so you don't have to pay extra baggage fees and things like
Yeah.
that. And I don't care how prepared you think you are, you always forget something. Or match conditions will change and dictate, hey, I need to have this and I didn't bring it with me. In case in point, it was a pro am this past August. It rained its ass off before the match, and of course, we didn't bring like cleats. I traveled with Blaze Romano that match. We didn't bring cleats with us, and we actually ended up. I think Buddy Knight was there with us, and he drove down for that match, and we ended up driving to Dick's Sporting Goods on Friday night and buying cleats because we knew that the one stage Chris Weissman was working had this downhill run through the mud, and they were putting straw down and everything else. And I slipped and fell that match, and and you try to take everything with you, but there are certain things you can't take, and we just happened to fly to that match, and we didn't take cleats with us.
Hmm.
So, even though you think you're prepared, there's always something. There's always something you forgot or something you need because of the way the environment changed. So, just having a list and having stuff with you all the time is great, but you also need to adapt if you have to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I guess the final thing I'll throw in here is that the most frequently used first aid stuff that I use on a range is just basic Neosporin and Band-Aids for
Yes.
those small little burns and cuts, and
Yep.
maybe you got like a sharp thing on a barbed wire, or cut yourself
Yep.
reset and steel or something like that.
You are correct. I have a backpack that I carry like with me on the range. This little sling bag and this other little black bag I keep my truck with me all the time. But when I go shoot at the range, I carry a backpack. I put like knee pads of gloves to pick up steel. But in that backpack, I have the same tourniquet. I have the same Israeli trauma dressing. But I use more band aids out of that backpack than anything else. Guys that are quad loading and they're splitting their fingers open when they're quad loading, burns or fingertip pad burns from shotguns when they grab their shotguns, things like that. Just having a box of 30 assorted band-aids in your bag or your range bag or whatever you're taking is a huge motivational uplifter for an individual, mentally when something happens to them. Because if you can stop that bleeding from your finger, or and you can and cover that burn on your fingertip, then you can finish the stage and finish the match. Then that really helps an individual when they're shooting mentally. Something
Absolutely.
simple like Band-Aids.
Yeah, simple.
Yep.
Back to the basics, right? Just the
Yep,
simple
absolutely.
skin knees and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right,
There's
George.
nothing worse than when you're bleeding all over and you can't quad load because your hand's bleeding all over, so a simple Band-Aid goes a long way.
Yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth. I had that happen to me in Colorado because I put skateboard tape on my pump gun
Uh-huh.
for patrol division and just spent the entire weekend scraping my fingerprints off. But the last day, yeah, on quad load, I looked down. I'm like, why is there blood all over my shotgun? And then
Right.
yeah, realized like, yeah, my thumb has been leaking this whole time.
Yep. Yep.
Well, George, anything else we need to cover for range medical here?
Um, no, not that I can think of. But if you're that guy and you're standing in the squad and you don't have medical training and someone points at you and says, "Hey, you know, call 911," make sure when you call them, they're going to ask you a lot of information. They're going to ask you your name. They're going to ask you for your cell phone number, callback number. And don't be surprised if you're getting a different 911 center than where you're located, where you think you should be getting. I'll give an example. I live close to the Chesapeake Bay. So where I work is, borders the Chesapeake Bay, and depending upon where you are, your cell service may pick up a tower on the opposite side of the bay in a different county.
Hmm.
So even if you get a different 911 dispatcher, give them your name, give them a telephone number in case you get disconnected. Give them the location. They will probably put you on hold. Don't be discouraged. They are transferring you to the appropriate 911 center because your cell signal got picked up somewhere else. So that's something that people are shocked when they don't get who they think they're calling on the phone. So just remain calm, give them all the information they need, and repeat that information back. So that way, because you're all excited about what's going on, you may miss something that they recommend or tell you. And especially, if you're the individual who's doing CPR, you're putting an AED on someone. Call somebody out by name. Don't just say, "Hey, you call 911," because you and the five other people standing next to you think that you're talking to someone else, and no one actually calls. And you're 10, 15 minutes into the incident, and no one's actually called. Call somebody out, call them by first name if you know them on their squad, or say, "Hey, you in the blue coat, go call 911." That way they know that you're talking to them specifically. That's probably an important thing that gets overlooked is just making sure that people know that you're directly talking to them about things.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a
and,
really good point.
and the other thing is don't be scared to act. Don't be scared to just because you did something in training a year ago, don't think that you just because you haven't done it, you don't know what you're doing. Like I said, you're covered under the Good Samaritan law and things like that. So be progressive, help out, do what you can do. If someone else has medical training, assist them. Let them tell you what to do to to help them. So don't be scared to jump in and help out. But in the same respect, don't have 40 people all crowding in a 2 foot space and being a burden.
Yeah, that's really good
Yeah.
advice. Well, George, man, this has been really good, man. I'm glad you brought up this topic, and I appreciate you coming on the show and
Yeah, no problem,
sharing
Dave.
your knowledge with the Three Gun Show audience.
Yep, no problem. I had a great time talking to you, and had a great time meeting and shooting with you down there in Texas, the Vortex Shooter Source, and
Yeah,
glad we got to talk about some of this stuff.
yeah, this is great, dude, and very important information for the Three Gun Show audience. So, for everyone listening at home, thanks for watching the show on YouTube. Thanks for listening to it on your podcast. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you're listening on your phone, you can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you find your podcast stuff. And always great things coming from the Three Gun Show. So I'm Dave Hartman for George Dorbert. We'll see you on the range.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.